Hello, welcome back to Supposedly Fun. I am Greg, here to do my book haul for the month of August. These are new books that I have added to my library since the last one I did in the month of July. I went a little bit crazy this month, although most of these were gotten at Book Exchange, my used bookstore in town, or the library, so they didn't cost a whole lot, but there's a lot. So let's get started and get through them. The first is a book I got from the library. It's Krista, Dora by Tim Murphy. This was mentioned on, I think it was Russell's channel, Ink and Paper blog. I need to start writing these things down because I am terrible at remembering. He talked about it when he was doing his bookshelf tour, and I was fascinated. It says, in this epic, ambitious, and deeply poignant novel, Tim Murphy follows a diverse group of people whose fates intertwine in an iconic building in Manhattan's East Village, the Krista Dora. Moving kaleidoscopically from the Tompkins Square riots and the activism of the 1980s to a future New York City of the 2020s where sub-zero winters are a thing of the past, Krista Dora recounts the heartbreak wrought by AIDS, portrays the allure and destructive power of hard drugs, and brings to life a bohemian lower Manhattan of artists and idealists. I mean, I am sold. That sounds so good. I'm really glad my library had a copy. I can't wait to get to this. So let's talk about some books I'm really interested in getting to read. The first is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernardine Evaristo. This is longlisted for the Booker Prize. I believe the shortlist comes out next week. I can't wait to see if this makes it. This was really the one that jumped out to me as the most interesting. I'm also, like many other people on BookTube, interested in Ducks Newburyport, which is funny considering how long and difficult the structure of that book is. This one just sounded so interesting to me. I can't wait to read it. I will read you an excerpt from The Dust Jacket. Welcome to Britain and 12 very different people, mostly women, mostly black, who call it home. Teeming with life and crackling with energy, Girl, Woman, Other follows them across the miles and down the years. With vivid originality, irrepressible wit, and sly wisdom, Bernardine Evaristo presents a gloriously new kind of history for this old country. Ever dynamic, ever expanding, and utterly irresistible. I love books where people put different kind of voices together, especially when they're voices that are typically marginalized or not typically put forth in publishing. So I am really interested in this. It's another reason I really wanted to get to The Women of Brewster Place by Gloria Naylor, hopefully this year. Very much looking forward to that as well. Now, I mentioned this briefly in a vlog that I did. As I was reading The Stonewall Reader, it added a lot of books to my TBR. And in one chapter, the person who created the Oscar Wilde bookstore in New York City was talking about how he curated a collection of books that he thought would responsibly represent the gay community. And one book he in particular did not want to carry at first, but decided to carry it. It became one of his best-selling books, was The Song of the Loon by Richard Amory. I was really curious. I looked it up, and I found that Arsenal Pulp Press put together what they call Little Sisters Classics. These are books that have a gay or lesbian focus that are in danger of being forgotten. So they wanted to put them together and get them back out there so people can discover them. Song of the Loon was number 2 in that series. What I particularly like about these books from Arsenal Pulp Press, which were put out roughly, I think, 10 years ago, but they are still in print. So if you are interested, you can still order them like I did. In the beginning, they're nicely put together. I love this little flap. It has the list of the books that are in the series. It has information about the author and the person who did the foreword. But it doesn't just have the novel, and this is true of the other 2 that I got from this series as well. It also has, if I can open the table of contents, so it has the book, it has a biography of the author, a review of the movie adaptation, an interview with the author, a response to that author's interview, an article about this in The Advocate in 1970, and another interview with the author from 1970. So it's got a lot of supplemental stuff about the book, and I just think that's really interesting. So this was the most popular gay book of the 1960s, and it's a lusty gay frontier romance. I mean, how do you say no to that? It tells the story of Ephraim McIver, a 19th century outdoorsman, and his travels through the American wilderness, where he meets a number of men who share with him stories, wisdom, and intimate encounters. Could be very interesting. So one of the other books I got from that series is Blackbird by Larry Duplichan. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It has a sticker on it that says it is now a feature film starring Monique. Apparently that film came out a couple of years ago. So again, these were published roughly 10 years ago, but they are still in print, so I'd recommend you check them out. This also has early cover art, a manuscript page, correspondence about the book, reviews, interviews, an excerpt of the screenplay, and an interview with somebody else about the book. So not only does it have the book, it has a lot of stuff about it. I think that's fascinating. So the reason this one jumped out at me is that, first published in 1986, Blackbird is a funny, moving coming-of-age novel about growing up black and gay in Southern California. Yeah, sign me up. Definitely interested in that. And the third and final one that I ordered, at least until I can go back and look at some of the others, is Patience and Sarah by Isabel Miller. This one is set in the 19th century. It's a classic lesbian novel tracing the relationship between Patience White, a painter, and Sarah Dowling, a farmer, whose romantic bond does not sit well with the puritanical New England farming community in which they live. Ultimately, they are forced to make life-changing decisions that depend on their courage and their commitment to one another. Yeah, again, I'm sold. I'm really interested in reading this at some point. So, and I definitely want to check out some of the others that have been published in these series. I love the idea of having them all together. So, check those out. I also got a copy of Becoming a Man by Paul Monette. This is a memoir. It's called Half a Life Story. This is about him as a child of the 1950s from a small New England town where he earns straight A's and shines in social and literary pursuits, all the while keeping a secret from himself and the rest of the world. So it's about him struggling to come to terms with his own sexuality and coming out. This is particularly interesting to me because if you've seen in any of my other videos, I have a gay father. He was born in 1950. So I'm always interested in reading memoirs or novels about men from this period because it's almost like an alternate history version of what my father's life could have been, or it helps me understand what his life was. Paul Monette has a lot of really well-regarded books on Goodreads, so I've been interested in reading one of his books for a long time, so they happened to have this in my local independent bookstore, so I had to snatch it up. Then there are a bunch of books that I got from the Book Exchange. These are used books. I got a copy of Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. Now, I had seen one of the movie versions, the one with Elizabeth Taylor. I think June Allison played Jo in that one. My sisters used to watch that movie all the time, but I had it in my head that Little Women is a girl book, so I should never bother reading it, so I never did. But recently, the podcast Little Gold Men did a book club episode about the book, and they talked about how even though some of the movies are good, there are a lot of things that are in the book that they have not quite been portrayed well in the movies because of this perception that it is for girls. And one thing they talked about in particular is the character of Amy and how no movie has done her justice yet. All in anticipation of the Greta Gerwig film that is coming out later this year. So it really got me interested in reading it, and this story of sisters during the Civil War and just getting to know it a little bit better. I also picked up a copy of Olive Kitteridge by Elizabeth Strout. This is for my Pulitzer Prize project. Now, I have actually read Olive Kitteridge. I didn't quite love it when I read it, but I think it's only been, 10 years since this was released? I feel like the more I think about it, the more I think I need to read it again now that I have that extra 10 years. I think I will like it a lot more. So I'm looking forward to that. I picked up Away in the World by V.S. Naipaul. He is a Nobel laureate. I had never heard of this book. I have Half a Life on my TBR. I talked about it recently during a book tag. But this caught my eye because spanning continents and centuries and defying literary categories, Away in the World tells intersecting stories about protagonists whose protagonists include the disgraced and half-demented Sir Walter Raleigh, fruitlessly seeking El Dorado in the New World, the foppish 19th century insurgent Francisco Miranda, who in his quest to liberate South America becomes entangled in his own fantasies and borrowed ideas, and the doomed Blair, a present-day Caribbean revolutionary stranded and eventually martyred in East Africa. I mean, that sounds really interesting. So I don't know when I'll get around to this, but I definitely want to at some point. Got a copy of Breath, Eyes, Memory by Edwidge Danticat. I've been wanting to read Danticat for a really, really, really long time, and it's kind of shameful that I have not gotten around to reading any of her books. So this is a novel, but I've just heard so many good things about Edwidge Danticat as a writer that I'm really looking forward to actually reading one of her books. I picked up The Stone Diaries by Carol Shields. This is also part of my Pulitzer Prize project. Now, I have, like Olive Kitteridge, I read this one, but I read this one when I was 19 and stupid, and I hated it. And I feel like I need to give it another chance because, again, the more I think about its theme, so it's kind of about how a woman's place in the world has traditionally been diminished. And because of that, how in many ways women can be unknowable, or could be unknowable. And I don't know that I really got that when I was reading it. And I'd be very interested in going back and rediscovering it and seeing if I have a better appreciation of it now that I'm not 19. And I picked up a copy of The House of Mirth by Edith Wharton. I really enjoyed The Age of Innocence when I read it. I think it's a great book, so I've been wanting to read another book of hers for a long time. Finally, I have a copy in the house. I also got A Summons to Memphis by Peter Taylor. This is also for my Pulitzer Prize project. This is one that in particular stood out to me as interesting. It is about a son who gets called back to his family home in Memphis, just like the title implies. And it's about, but he's called back by his sisters who disapprove of their father's fiance, and it becomes a family drama from there. It just sounds really interesting, so can't wait to get to that. I also picked up a copy of Ohio by Stephen Markley. I've heard, this flew under the radar for me when it was first published. Was it last year? I had never heard of it until somebody pointed out, and since then I've just been hearing more and more about it from people on BookTube who have read it, and it just sounds really interesting. It sounds really good. So it's about 4 former classmates converging on the Rust Belt town where they grew up, each of them with a mission, all of them haunted by regrets, secrets, and lost loves. I think this also kind of deals with, at least in part, the opioid crisis. It just sounds really interesting. Then 2 books I got from my local library because they sell used books. Ironweed, which is also for my Pulitzer Prize project by William Kennedy. This one, it's a movie tie-in. I don't usually buy movie tie-ins, but when it's on sale at your local library for $1, you don't argue with it. You just buy it and go, because I've heard good things about Ironweed. I've never read William Kennedy before, so it just seems like, I feel like this is one that I'm going to like. So hopefully that will turn out to be true when I get around to it as part of that project. And then they had Rabbit is Rich, which is part of my Pulitzer Prize project as well, but it's from my Pulitzer Prize nemesis, because part of me just viscerally does not want to read John Updike, but part of me really feels like I should, in order to have a complete picture of the modern literary world. And we'll see. We shall see. And then finally, my Book of the Month Club pick for this month was Dominicana by Angie Cruz. This just sounded, I had never heard of this book until it popped up as one of the options that I could choose from, and it just sounded really interesting. 15-year-old Ana Cancion never dreamed of moving to America the way the girls she grew up with in the Dominican countryside did, but when Juan Ruiz proposes and promises to take her to New York City, she must say yes. It doesn't matter that he is twice her age or that there is no love between them. Their marriage is an opportunity for her entire close-knit family to eventually immigrate. So on New Year's Day, 1965, Anna leaves behind everything she knows and becomes Anna Ruiz, a wife confined to a cold 6th-floor walk-up in Washington Heights. Lonely and miserable, Anna hatches a reckless plan to escape. I'm really sold pretty hard on this. I'm very eager to get to reading it. I mean, it's an immigrant story. It's New York City in 1965, and, you know, I'm originally from Long Island. I lived in the New York City area for most of my life, although I did move around. It's very much a place that I identify with and call home. I lived in a 6th-floor walk-up in Harlem, not Washington Heights. But I have a friend who lived in Washington Heights, and it just feels like it's going to be dealing, even though it's an immigrant story and I'm a white dude from Long Island, it is a story that it combines my personal history with something I'm really interested in and want to continue to learn more and experience more of in books. And yeah, I'm sold pretty hard. You know, I feel like I'm always drawn back to New York in certain ways. There's a line from a Neil Diamond song, I Am, I Said. He's talking about, he spends like 2 years in LA writing an album, and he ended up writing I Am, I Said. And in it he says, LA's fine, but it ain't home. New York's home, but it ain't mine no more. So that's kind of what it feels like to me. It's almost like an expatriate, how they would look back at their country and have these complicated feelings toward it. And somehow all of that kind of came out when I was reading the blurb for this book in that weird way emotions have of just popping up like a volcano. And there it is. So those are that's the massive amount of books that I brought into my library in the month of August. I'd love to hear what you brought in. Maybe if you're looking forward to reading any of these books, let me know. If you have opinions about any of these books, let me know that as well. Drop a comment down below. And I'll be back again. Thank you for your time watching this video. Until next time, happy reading.